kidney, the root that you're probably familiar with in medical terms, renal, actually derives from the same root that the word reins comes from. So about the time that the King James Version of the Bible was being translated, it was thought that the kidneys were somehow the seat of conscience, and that the kidneys were somehow involved in kind of reining in our like our passions and our behaviors and that type of thing. If you look at the role of the kidneys as a filter, this word filter actually derives from the same root as the word felt. And felt, as you know, you take a material, it could be cotton, it could be wool more typically, and you expose it to heat and moisture, and the fibers kind of interlace with each other and forms a very thick, very dense type of material there. So felt may have been used to filter out maybe impurities or solid particles and that type of thing from water previously. But when we look at the kidney itself, when we look at its anatomy and physiology, we see that this notion of tightly woven and kind of thickened material applies to the anatomy of the kidney. The first chapter of the Yellow Emperor's Classic, in a passage from that, it talks about the maturation of the human being. It talks about the maturation of the male and the maturation of the female, as well as the decline of faculties with age. And throughout that passage, it refers to the kidneys as being kind of an important part of that function. So typically, as we age and as we grow older, at least from a Chinese medicine perspective, the kidneys become more deficient. We have a decrease in their function, also a decrease in what the kidneys are thought to store in Chinese medicine, anatomy and physiology, which is the jing, the essence in the body. But it's not until chapter 8 that we actually get sort of a definition of what the kidneys are exactly. The line that we'll be looking at is from chapter 8. Ling Lan. Ling means miraculous, and Lan means orchid. So it's the secret library. It's the treatise of the secret library of the miraculous orchid. And in this chapter, it first starts out with Huang Di, who's the Yellow Emperor, asking Qibao, who's his physician, how is it that the individual organs relate to one another, and what are their sort of relative stations? In other words, what are their ranks relative to one another? And then Qibao answers by, thank you very much. Qibao answers by going through each of the organs and saying sort of what the role and the function of that organ is, and in listing them, he sort of ranks them in order. So he starts with the heart, and then with the lung, and then down towards the end of the list, he gives 12 different organ networks. Down towards the end of the list, third from the bottom, he gives the kidneys. And what he says about the kidneys is, he first starts out and says, Shenzhi. Shenzhi. Shen is the kidneys. And zhi, this character here originally was a picture of like a mouth or a pot with an herb or something over it. Sometimes it's depicted, sometimes it will be depicted more with the plant like this, and then you'll see little pieces of things coming off of it. And one more elaborate depiction that actually shows sort of like a bird. And with pieces coming off of it over this pot. So, zhi, when you see that character in the classical Chinese writings, usually what it does is it indicates that whatever word or character rather that precedes it is about to be defined. It's about to be kind of boiled down and decocted and explained. What it says about the kidneys is shenzhi. Zuo. Qiang. Zhiguan. The making of strength, the office of making of strength. So this guan here refers to its office or its station. This is a particle that indicates, it's a genitive particle, so it indicates possession, or this originally was written like a foot coming up to a line, or a foot kind of standing on something. But it came to be sort of a genitive marker in classical Chinese. So 做强, 做 means to make or to do, and 强 means strength. But in this passage, each of the characters has a more literal meaning than simply the modern translation of it. For instance, this character here, 做, was originally written. We have the person radical on the left, which usually indicates agency or doing something. And then the other part on the right was written like this. And also, in another version, it's written like this. Each of these characters is a picture of, in the ancient times, they had pieces of clothing, these large robes that they wear, and the robe would consist of a single type of fabric, but then around the neck and along the collar there'd be more elaborate embroidery, usually a warmer or a softer type of material to kind of keep out the elements, but also to deal with, the sting and whatnot. So that piece of material would take a lot of time to make, and also it'd be very dense. It'd be a higher quality type of material. So this piece here, this 做, it can mean, in the modern translation, it can mean 做, to do or to make, or it can also mean this acting as, it can act as this character here, which is pronounced 家. This 家, which is like something that's very intricately woven, this piece of the clothing that's there. That's important when you look at the kidneys, because the first part of filtration in the kidneys, you have a system of arteries, beginning with the renal arteries that enters into the kidneys. These kidneys have this sort of bow shape to them. And then these blood vessels go up into the cortex of the kidney, this outer layer of the kidney. And in that cortex there, they become smaller and smaller arteries until they're arterioles, until finally they form these very small arteriolar tufts, where the blood vessels, all this blood pressure that enters the kidneys, is forced through these very small, very tortured little blood vessels. Now, those blood vessels there, they excrete, or they would excrete a fair amount of fluid, except that surrounding them is a capsule called the Bowman's capsule, or glomerular capsule. And that capsule consists of an endothelium it's much thicker and denser than your normal endothelium. Your normal endothelium is like around, just for you to have scales, about 60 nanometers thick. But the endothelium surrounding these capillaries is somewhere between 350 and 400 nanometers thick. So it's much thicker. It's trying to contain